Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you're enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you would like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have two tiers of support, $3 per month and $7 per month. So again, our Patreon page is patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. In today's episode, we're talking to Brian Teacher. Brian Teacher is a former top professional tennis player and coach, as well as the founder of the Full Court Tennis app. As a player, Brian won the 1980 Australian Open and had career highs of number 7 in the world for singles and number 5 in the world for doubles. He has coached top players including Andre Agassi, Rusedski, Daniel Nestor, and Max Mirnyi. In this conversation, we discuss Brian's playing and coaching background, as well as the Full Court Tennis app. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Brian Teacher. And we are excited to welcome Brian Teacher to the Tennis IQ podcast. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So we'll start off the conversation as we often do. We'd love to learn a little bit about your introduction to tennis, and then how that all started, and how that sort of led you to where you are today.
Well, I grew up in the 50s, late 50s, 60s in San Diego, California. And there weren't a lot of tennis clubs at that time. So I played at the public parks. There was a big public parks called Morley Field, which when I was a young kid and, 5 to 10 years old, there was about 8 courts. And it ended up, by the time I was a teenager and left San Diego to go to UCLA, there was like 22 courts there. So it was really kind of a hub for tennis in San Diego, where everybody in the city would come down, and where the parents would drop the kids off, and you would play tennis all day after school or on the weekends. That was like my second home, basically. We just go hang out, we play tennis. It was the day and age where you could drop your kids off. You didn't have to be too worried about them. You'd leave them there. They'd play for, 5-6 hours tennis, and you'd pick them up and take them home. So it was a great place to learn how to play, and I have super fond memories of Morley Field in San Diego. And that's really where it all started, down there, and, just kind of playing the junior tournaments and learning how to, progress. How do you get from the 10 and under? How do you get from the top of the 10 and under to the top of the 12 and under? And when you get beat badly, what did you learn from that? A lot of times, this is the Tennis IQ podcast, so a lot of times it's like emotional, right? When you think you're the best 10 and under, which I thought in San Diego, and some guy beats you 0-0, then it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't even be playing this game, or what do I do now? I mean, I thought I was great, and now this guy just beat me 0-0 that came to town, and should I quit or what? And so you have to figure out, well, I kind of like playing, but maybe I need to figure out how to get better, right? What is it that I need to work on to get better? And, and I'm not going to catch this guy for a while, but, I see him ahead of me there, and I'm going to keep chasing him. And then one day I am going to catch him, and so it's kind of like, that's part of mentally and vision, and having a vision and kind of doing what you enjoy doing, but not worrying so much about the initial result, but just doing the activity you enjoy and trying to get better. I think that's tennis in itself, right? If you think you're going to be like the pro player immediately, or you're going to do this or that in tennis, it's not going to happen. You need to enjoy the process, basically. So I think that's the most important part of the game, is enjoy the process, figure out how to get better. There's a zillion different levels of play every step of the way, and just be happy where you are. And you can always be looking forward to, to getting better, and plot your schedule and your time. How are you going to get better? But you need to do it steps at a time. You can't go from step 1 to step 5 without doing the other 4 steps. That, oh man, I need to get to this level and beat the guys at that level, and what do I need to work on to get my game to that next level? And so it's really a step progress. And it's that way all the way up to the pros. There's big steps from juniors to college, from college to pros, and from entering the pros to getting better at the pros and up the pros. It's every step of the way trying to figure it out. But if you don't enjoy the process, then figure out something else better to do with your time. That's it,
That I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's a theme that we've talked about a lot on this show in terms of really prioritizing that process in terms of that leading to greater development, and also in terms of each person enjoying that development process a lot more, and ultimately sticking with the sport and not burning out. Was there one step of that process that you described from starting off pretty recreationally to starting to play junior tournaments and then college and then ultimately professional, that was maybe a bigger leap? Like, was it juniors to college or college to pro, or maybe even different levels within the program that was the hardest leap to make?
Well, I think the two leaps were, the juniors, you're just, they're the same from basically the 12s to the 18s or whatever. It's just the kids are getting, as you get older, you're getting stronger. And so as you're getting stronger, your game needs to develop, with bigger shots and this or that. So, but you're at least moving up in that framework, and you can kind of see the framework that each division, is 2 years, right? So, you're playing kids 2 years older, and the same age, right? So there's a physicality of those 2 years. But if you're a junior and you have to play a kid 4 years older, and he's good, that's a huge difference growing up, because the strength of the shot and the strength of movement and everything, it's typically too much for kids growing up, that big a leap. But when you get into college, all of a sudden, okay, you're physically a little bit more mature, you're 17, 18, sometimes 19 years old. I was 17 and a half when I entered UCLA. But now all of a sudden I'm playing with guys that are 21 and 22 possibly, right? And so that's a huge difference physicality wise, right? But you're a little stronger physically, and you can start playing at their level. When I'm 12, I can't compete against a 16-year-old. There's no way. But when I'm 17, I can kind of start playing with a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old, right? I might not be able to beat him, but I can at least kind of, start physically at that level, at a better level than the 12 and 16-year-old. So I think that the college thing was the next step that is a harder level. And so you have to kind of at that level, you're now competing against guys that are 4, possibly 5 years older than you. And so you can do it. You can push yourself physically, but you got to get used to it. And you got to really that. So it's a bigger level to jump. Freshmen in college to play the guys that are in the seniors college, that's a big level. You can do it, and it's a big challenge, and it was kind of a fun challenge because I really relished it when I went into college my freshman year at UCLA. I think by the time my freshman year was over, I was kind of playing at the top of the team, not necessarily one, but I was beating the number 2 guy, and so it was an exciting time. And I really enjoyed it, but it was challenging, very challenging, a lot different than playing the junior. So that level, and then going from, college to the pros is even a bigger step, right? Because you think you're pretty good in the college, but then the pros is a whole different level of commitment and professionalism. And of course, you're playing against the world, you're not just playing against your people in your country. So those are the two biggest levels, basically, to move up.
One of the things I remember about you playing, Brian, and I maybe dating myself for the audience, I do remember you playing. I mean, I enjoyed watching you play. And
what are you trying to tell me? I'm old?
Well, you already said that, Brian, right? So with the 50s thing, but I'm not that far behind. So one of the things I do remember, though, was your game was very smooth, very technically sound.
Thank you.
And that's something I know that you're passionate about in terms of now training people with full court tennis and so forth. But how did that evolution happen for you? Because tennis was different, when you started growing up, mostly wood rackets. The grips were not necessarily as extreme as they are today. It was almost a different brand. And I think things started really to transition toward the end of your career, like the early 80s, with Lendl changing things, maybe even Borg to a certain extent, how they hit the ball and the amount of power coming in. But what was sort of the technical foundation for your game? How did that develop?
Oh, well, just, different coaches along the way, experimentation and just trying to figure out, what worked. But there definitely was, a transition, and I made a transition when I won the Australian Open. I was the first player to switch from a wooden racket to a mid-sized graphite racket. There was Prince racket was already out with that big oversized racket, which was like a huge change in technology compared to a wooden racket. It was like you're playing with this trampoline type of thing. But and then I didn't gel so much with the Prince, but I liked kind of this mid-size graphite, which was a company, Kuhn & Low Pro Kennex, which was making kind of some of the Prince rackets over in Taiwan. So I gravitated towards that. So, it helped with a little more power. And, but the mishits were not as good. The technology wasn't as good as the technology today, because now the rackets are lighter and producing more power with bigger sweet spots. That was a pretty small little sweet spot, but it helped to play a little bit more power into the game. And, so how are you going to get that power into your game? And, I think overall the technique evolved even from the 60s to the 80s quite a bit, and then when, I think in the 60s, more people were like, you even see people today that, like, some people, older people that have learned, and, the left foot is always in front of the right foot when they're hitting a forehand for a right-handed player. It's like, no, you don't hit the ball like that. It's like breaking those habits were like those were kind of things in the 50s and 60s, how they taught tennis, right? And then it was kind of semi-open stance, of course. And you're talking about Borg and Lendl, everybody was like semi-open basically. And so that was the next generation that everybody played like that, right? And then they started adding more topspin, though. Bjorn was, pretty much played his career with the wooden racket. He had a tremendous amount of topspin with the wooden racket, and he had a special racket. I mean, it was like his racket was like a war club or whatever. It had like 4 or 5 extra laminates of wood on it, and he strung his racket so tight, and it was the funniest thing in the world, because he was like, strung it like at 80 pounds, and McEnroe was stringing his like at 40 pounds or something with a wooden racket. It was like quite polar opposites of two different top players, how they played and hit the ball. I think today, more so, more guys are kind of like in the mid 50s or something like that, with the different synthetic strings, and they're able to put so much spin on the ball and get so much speed with their stuff. So it's quite a, it's evolved. The techniques evolved quite a bit, but still, I think that overall, more guys were volleying better on the whole. You had more people, forget the fact serve and volley. I don't think you can serve and volley today as much as you did when I was playing. But even so, like if you look at Nadal's got a great volley, Federer's got a great volley, Djokovic has a very good volley. Those guys are great volleys. Not a lot of guys use the transition game and come into net and use the net game that effectively. If you have an effective net game like those guys and use it, I think you'll be a top player. And if you're good on the ground strokes, because it just gives you a more full court game, like full court tennis.
Nice transition there, Brian. Yeah.
That's why we call it full court tennis. We want you to have a full court game and learn from the best coaches, right? Who are on the app, which is very cool.
So let's talk about how you transitioned to that, right? Because your passion, obviously, for developing this app and coaching and all things tennis. How did the idea really gel together in your mind? How did you put all this together, now in terms of the technology, and what's your vision for it?
Well, I started playing around with the technology probably 8 to 10 years ago, which was, I think, originally was a company called UberSense or Coach's Eye, and they were just general apps where you could take a video and it would drop into the format where you could scroll it back and forth digitally, and then you could draw on it, and show position. I said, oh, this is great technology. Wouldn't it be great to use this as a coach and as a player, former player trying to learn the game, growing up, and as a coach, wouldn't it be great to use it and be able to compare it your image side by side to like a pro or a top pro? And I said, yeah. I said that, I was finding when I was working with kids on the court in coaching that it would work great to be able to show them what they're doing, because most kids, you tell them, oh, your arm's this way, your elbow's here, and they said, no, it's not. And then you show them and they said, oh, I can't believe I'm doing that. And it's because muscle memory, you don't, it just goes there when you practice a bad habit. So they're not really sure what they're doing or why they're doing it. It just goes there. So if you can show them, and then I said, well, if I can get some pro images on here and press a button and compare it to a pro image, I can work on the court with a kid. You can really get like kind of super learning to show them. Not only can I show them what they're doing, but I can show them what they should be doing, what another pro is. And so it's like, wow, this is great. So I said, why don't we build this? And so I did. So I got some players' rights and some players' images. I put it on there, and I said, wouldn't it be great if you could hire a coach? And maybe you're in a place where there's, good coaching is not so accessible, and maybe you wanted to get an opinion from a coach. Why can't we have good coaches around the world? And then I said, well, ATP, WTA coaches, these guys, I was an ATP coach. I'm an ATP coach, and I travel around the world coaching these players. But, these guys work with the best players, the stars on the tour today, but nobody knows who these coaches are typically. But they're working with these players. I mean, can you tell me who Daniel Medvedev's coach is? There you go. But he's the number one, number two player in the world, and you have no idea who his coach is. It's João Cervera, but he's a French guy. He's on my app, but nobody knows who they are, right? So we need to get these names out there. If you wanted to get a lesson from Giles, why not go to Full Court Tennis and get an opinion and connect with them? Because you would have no idea otherwise, right? So, I wanted to basically help these coaches out and say, okay, put your rates on my app. We can hire you for a live, in-app virtual lesson, for a stroke analysis, for a live video call where we can go over any match or practice session that you've recorded or anything on the internet. So, so that's kind of how it was basically born, to try to help coaches, but at the same time to help players. If you want to get an opinion, you can, but you can also self-learn on the app. So if you can't afford a coach, you can basically go on the app and, get your parents to take some video of you and compare it yourself to pros on the app and self-learn. And I wanted to build this community where, players could connect to coaches, basically. So you can message a coach in the app, you can follow their tips and drills. We got like 15 channels. Mental training is one of the channels on Full Court Tennis. So you guys should be posting mental training tips and to get hired for mental training coaches, since that's what you do, right? Why not, right? So it's got something for everybody on there as far as a coach, and it's for all levels of coaching and all levels of playing.
That makes sense. And I do, Brian, you and I have had some discussions about this, and I am on the app and, looking forward to utilizing it more. But no, I appreciate, and I think all of our listeners appreciate the fact that Full Court Tennis is yes, it sounds like it started just based on stroke analysis. And I have used Coach's Eye actually in the past when I was coaching on court with some players to show them, I think specifically on the serve and maybe on some other shots as well. Because yes, you can let's use the serve as an example. You can explain where you want the player to have their elbow, and how they want to be turning their body, and exactly where they want the toss to be, and some of these things. But when somebody can see it for themselves, it oftentimes that light bulb will go off. So I think it's really cool how you've taken the app from something that really focused on stroke analysis, and I know there's still a lot of that on there, but also included that mental component as a necessary ingredient for the success of tennis players.
Well, if you can't be successful in tennis if you don't have a good mind on the court, and if you don't stay in the present and stay focused and positive, it's impossible. And stay in the moment, it's impossible to be a top tennis player. So it's very important to have good mental qualities, how to manage yourself on the court and what to be thinking about and what to focusing on. Right.
One of the things I like about the video, the ability to get video of the pros, if we do tie this again to mental training, is just watching it. Forget about even the comparison. Just watching it can help you create a blueprint in your mind of what you want to emulate on the court, right? We just did an episode on visualization and how to use that off the court and then have it benefit your training. That's actually another way that players could use the app, is to look at various pros and how they execute different strokes, and then be watching that as a means of recording it and imprinting it in their brain as a blueprint, which then makes it much easier to go out onto the court when you have a model already kind of installed that allows you to repeat that. I'm just curious what your thoughts on that as another use even for coaches or players who are on the app.
Well, I think it's critical for, if you're trying to, improve as a junior, let's say, and you want to be a top junior. Let's just look at that. So I think it's critical for you to be able to watch the pro game and say, you know what, I like this guy or I like that guy. And, whether it's Nadal, Federer, whether it's Tsitsipas, whether it's Alcaraz or whatever. And you say to yourself, you know what is it that I like about them? Well, I mean, look at the guy Alcaraz. He's got incredible footwork. Look at how he never stops his feet, and he's one of the fastest guys. So maybe, I'm pretty fast. I can emulate moving my feet like that, or I can emulate hitting my forehand like Alcaraz. He's got such a great forehand. So it's little things like that that give you a visual imprint in your brain that you can then start saying, you know what, why can't I play? I can pretend I'm that. I can do that, and that's basically how you create your reality. Right? It's like little steps at a time. I mean, you're not going to become Alcaraz overnight, but you can if you can see yourself taking on some of those characteristics, then you need to start emulating that and start building your reality. Say, you know what? I'm actually not too bad at moving my feet. Look, I just moved them pretty well today. You know what? I think I can even do better tomorrow. And in 6 months from now, I'm going to be in this position. And wow, I'm here. So now in 6 months, where do I go from here? Well, is there any room for improvement? And so that's how you kind of build your reality, basically. You're visualizing and you're getting your imprinting, and it's very important. Sure. Critical.
Totally. I think there's definitely a lot that can be learned from video analysis. I actually had an experience recently with an adult player that I work with, and she's had a tough time with her serve, and I think specifically with her second serve and double faulting. And I asked, if she ever has the ability to film herself or have some sort of video that we could, talk through and watch. And she did, and had about an hour, a little bit more than an hour session recorded. And she watched it, and then we discussed it. And what her feedback before we even started talking about it was, okay, yeah, there are some double faults, but there's a lot more than that. There are some aces, some unreturned serves. There are a lot of great points there. So I think it can be very easy for tennis players to maybe fixate or focus on certain mistakes that they're making, but just like you were saying, Brian, with a player's footwork, understanding, hey, maybe there are certain things I'm doing well. Maybe there are certain ways that my game or my strokes actually, I'm doing certain things similarly to certain pros, to Alcaraz, to Djokovic, to whoever it may be, Holger Rune, who just had a huge tournament in Paris.
Sure.
But being able to see that for themselves and then having that ability to compare themselves to the top ATP, WTA players is really a cool feature.
Sure, I think so. Like you said, it's very important to for the mental part of the game also is to let go of your errors, basically, just to let them go. Don't let them, don't let yourself get frustrated, stay cool. And, it's like, okay, I made an error, but okay, just hit it, instead of aiming so close to the line, don't hit it so close to the line, or, hit it more cross court, or why am I going up the line when I don't need to? I don't need to paint the lines. Just get it cross court and then work for better positioning or something. It's just about adjusting. It's always about management. Tennis is a lot about management.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the app, in terms of like maybe a player getting started with that, Brian, how does one get started actually in terms, you mentioned the different models. It's available on, I think, iOS.
I think it's on iOS at the Apple Store right now. So it's a free download. You can just download it for free and start connecting with coaches on the app. And of course, we have the full court feed where coaches and players can post, so you can follow and interact with, world-class coaches right there. And if you want to start, comparing your strokes, so it's a free download, but so the players in the player library, so each player has at least 50 clips that you can basically use. I think the player clips are anywhere from $199 a month to $299 a month rental fee. So you can rent, whether it's Taylor Fritz or Steve Johnson, there's 10 players in there that you can rent that's good models to look at strokes to compare. So maybe you want to say, you know what, I like Taylor Fritz's forehand, I like Steve Johnson's forehand. Let's look at both of those. Let's see what their similarities and differences are, and let's see what my forehand looks like to those two. Those are two world-class forehands, right? So, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you need to kind of be somewhere in those certain parameters, right? So you don't want to do something like that's so different than these guys are doing, right? So there's different styles of play, but the essential ingredients are typically in the swings, in both swings. And so that's what you need to look for. What are the essential ingredients? What is the difference between Steve Johnson's forehand and Taylor Fritz? What are the similarities? And so you need to be able to say, let's look at them. I need to know this. I want to hit a good forehand. They both have great forehands. Why are their forehands great? What do they do that's similar that I need to pick up on? And so you need to spend a little time doing that so you can understand yourself, right? Because it needs to click in your head, not anybody else's head, right? So, you can self-learn in there. If you really want to learn, you can self-learn. You don't have to get a coach. If you want a coach, they're there for you, but you can also self-learn and help yourself if you can't afford a coach. That's really what I was trying to do, is say, look, you can get a world-class opinion from the top coach, but you can also basically figure it out yourself in the app. You can get a lot of information. If you're really hungry and want to do this, you can figure it out and get a ton of information right here. That's great information for you to learn how to play the game. You don't have to be a wealthy, parent, or you don't have to be a wealthy kid. If you play at the public parks, anybody can figure out how to spend $1.99 or $2.99 for the month to rent these clips and to learn, basically, right?
So so one question that I was thinking of is, we talked a lot about your development as a player, Brian, from the public parks, from all the way from the age of 5 up to the top of the game, winning the Australian Open. Have you thought about how you would have utilized a platform like this
absolutely
as a junior and developing player?
Absolutely. I would have been at the park. Every one of my buddies. So we obviously, in the 60s, there wasn't the internet, right? So and there weren't 5 million TV stations and programs on TV, right? There were 3 stations or whatever, ABC, NBC, CBS, right? And their programming. So, if we had something like this then, we were at the park all day playing tennis. So we'd be playing with this stuff all day at the park, basically videotaping each other and looking at each other's strokes and comparing them to the pros. Are you kidding me? We hardly had access to look at pros like once a year on TV, right? So, everybody is just a little jaded with how much information is out there. Yet, with all this information, are they really utilizing it? No. Typically, no is the answer, right? So, I've put it in this format to hopefully to get them to pay attention and utilize it if they want to really learn the game and help themselves.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information out there anyway, right? In terms of, it's almost like knowing what to pay attention to.
Right. So you can go on YouTube and you can Google all these guys' strokes and you can do this and that, but you can't look at it and say, well, how does this work in relation to my forehand, right? And so that's really, there's not the technology out there. So here we've got the technology, and the pros to do it, basically.
Right. And let's say, I'm a young player and I'm beginning to progress through my game, and, maybe I've started off with, more basic strokes, but now I'm getting bigger, I'm getting stronger. How does the app support me through that progression as I'm getting bigger and stronger and so forth? Is there a way to kind of help me deal with those those advanced stages of the game?
In general, you can look at the tips. So we have different levels of play in the app. So, we don't want to bother the pro or advanced player from looking at beginning and intermediate content. So you can look for your level of play, and you can follow the coaches at that level of play so that you don't have to look for content that is a lower level, basically. So that's how we kind of filter it out. But the pro clips are the pro clips, whether you're 10 years old or whether you're 25 years old, they stay the same, right? The pro clips. So, but I get it. So as you get better, you want to look at more advanced content and more advanced drills. So I think that would be, so you would just limit your level of play in the app to what you wanted to follow.
Has there been some interest from teams in terms of high school teams or college teams? Do you see an application where teams could benefit from this technology in this app?
I absolutely do. And so, in fact, I'm trying to start reaching out to academies right now because I think it would be great for academies. It would be great for high schools. 100% sure. And so I need, I'm only, I have myself and I have a couple people helping me. So we have to really our resources aren't enormous, but we're trying to reach out to academies now. So what we did is we added the availability. So let's say that, I had a lesson with a student. So you can basically choose to have a free lesson with a student in the app. You just look up on their profile and a coach can start a free lesson. Now, that player can block you if he doesn't want you in there, but if he accepts a lesson from you, you have a lesson. But it's up to you as a coach. You could put your rates up there. You can be hired or the coach can just start a free lesson with whoever he wants. And so once he has that lesson established, he can invite as many students or players or coaches into that lesson space where you can exchange video and annotate it and look at tips and drills. And it's all got a date and time stamp on it. So you can say, okay, let's look at juniors forehand today in November. And now let's look at it, in January. Have we improved? What's been going on with this thing? Well, here it was in November, and let's look. Oh, wow, it's gotten a lot better. And these are the steps and the videos that we've put in there with the annotation and showing you the steps. And so we've got a history of it. But you could basically do this with an academy so that you could have, you could have 5-10 kids in there in that one lesson space and a couple coaches in there, basically sharing information and sharing stuff. So yes, it would be great. It is great for academies and for high schools. And we need to start getting this information out to these high schools and stuff to show them.
Yeah, I can really see how it would be helpful for high schools because you're often dealing with, disparate levels in the team. Very often the players at the bottom of the team probably playing doubles are, not as advanced, say, as the players who may be at the top playing singles. But it's so important for those players throughout the lineup to be fundamentally sound as well as tactically and mentally sound because, oftentimes those high school matches are won with those the lower spots in the lineup. So I can see this being a great thing for high school coaches. So we probably have some listening that this might be a really good platform for them, and I can see its usage there just for one coach to work with. He's got kind of a captive audience there, and they've got them all practice at the same time. They can be uploading videos, so I think that would be really fascinating for a team like that.
Yep. We need as a company need to start pushing for the academy since we just added this about 3 weeks ago to this academy thing. So we just have to start pushing it out there.
That makes sense. Well, I know, as we start to wrap up our conversation today, I wanted to see if there's maybe, any big, important elements that we haven't touched on either, in the first portion of the conversation where we're talking more about your background and, how that fits into, the mental game and your success, or talking about full court tennis and everything that's going on there. Any important aspects that we haven't covered?
Oh, as far as full court tennis, I think we've got it down. I mean, looking forward, it's a free download. It's the reality is it makes me a better coach when I work on it with my students. It makes me a better coach. So I played at the highest level of the game, won the Australian Open in '81. I was ranked as high as 7 in singles, 6 in doubles. I've coached, on the ATP tour, the WTA tour extensively, worked with a lot of top pros, which I don't need to go into it all. But the bottom line is the app makes me a better coach. And if it makes me a better coach with my resume, it should make 99% of the coaches out there better coaches. So why not use it because it's going to make you a better coach, right? And it's going to help your students on the court, not just remotely because you can get hired for a lesson and make some money in the app, but it's going to help you be a better coach with your students on the court right there and there. So they can immediately, you can take a video, you can show your student, you can go over their technique, compare it to a pro, and within 3 to 5 minutes get back to work and start working on what you need to do. And the student has a better visualization. So yeah, utilize it. Yeah, it's crazy not to download it. It's here. It's free.
Yeah, and I think, Josh, even as you told the story about your encore work using video, it is such an amazing tool for coaches today to utilize. So it's you're 100% right, Brian. It just makes us all better on the court as coaches.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it went back to, I just thought before I went to UCLA in 72, and I remember at one time, I think sometime 70, 72, sometime in that area, I had the opportunity to go look at my strokes on video equipment, and so the video equipment at that time, you needed a shopping cart full of equipment to roll out to the court and set up on stands to be able to take a video, and just look at yourself, right? It was, to kind of look at it almost live or in the next second. So it was just a big rigmarole. And to think today that, you got this little device and boom, and it's right there, right at your fingertips. It's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Brian, thanks so much for joining us to talk about,
Sure.
a little bit about your career and full court tennis and what you're up to these days. We'll definitely put links to the app and to how people can connect with you in our episode show notes. But thanks again.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was a great conversation with Brian Teacher. Hope you all enjoyed that. I think one of the things that really stood out to me about that conversation was with the portion where we talked about video analysis, and I talked about some of my experiences, both as a coach on court, working with players using video analysis, and actually we talked about some of the early technology. I think this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was using it with some players, and a little bit later, but I remember using it then, and also how the benefits of players being able to see what they're doing. So not just, we use the serve as an example, not just hearing from a coach where they want the toss to be, or where they want, their shoulder to be in terms of the rotation, or their elbow, and the positioning of the different mechanics, or their legs, how they're bending them, but really to be able to see it for themselves. And also, I think the ability to be able to watch a match or watch some points. And I think people have the tendency to let maybe errors stand out, or, we've talked about how people can sort of define themselves based on deficiencies in their games or weaknesses. So to be able to watch yourself, and you can start to build up a better picture, because you see maybe the errors, but you also see the winners, you see the nice shots, you see what your opponent is doing maybe a little bit clearer, and it helps to put everything into perspective. So I think of the different pieces of the conversation, I think that was definitely one that stood out to me. How about you, Brian?
Well, I wanted to tack on to that, Josh, because I think anybody who's read The Inner Game of Tennis can understand the use of images in learning. Um, and that's really what we're seeing. We know that someone simply talking at you about trying to do something, it would take a lot more words than actually showing you how to do it, through the either modeling or through images. And that I think is a great aspect of video analysis, being able to see clips of yourself or see clips of top professionals or players, that you want to emulate in terms of strokes. So that is I think a really good part of today's technology, and full court tennis could certainly add to that, the ability to use your visual processing as a means of learning more deeply, and even I think we talked about in the episode, can you use that stuff then to translate into a visualization practice, not just seeing it and learning it, but going off and doing some of this on your own, so that you are getting some mental reps, some mental rehearsal on some of these things that you're learning. So I totally agree, and I think the more that we can be using visualization or imagery with players on their learning journey, the better it is for them. Before we got into the app, one of the things I thought was really interesting that Brian talked about in his own career was really the emotional journey through tennis. And I think he hit on something that is pretty fundamental to all players, which is as we go along, you're going to win matches, you're going to have close matches, but then you're also going to lose matches, and maybe you're going to lose some matches that are quite discouraging. And you're going to face kind of a crossroad of, well, that was kind of humiliating. Do I keep, do I let that distract me from my overall goal? Do I just quit? What do I do? And it really pushes you to make that decision of how much you really want it. And how we all deal with some of those more humbling experiences is important because you will inevitably um, get beaten badly at times, or you will perform poorly at times when you really felt the match was very important to you. And so, how do you deal with that emotionally and keep going? And I think that was something that he showed was a real strength of his, is that he was able to take some of those losses and use them more maybe as fuel to keep going in his career, or process the loss more as revealing what needed work in his game, or maybe revealing the understanding that, hey, I'm 14, this guy is 17. There's obviously a maturity difference, a physicality difference. Maybe that has to do with it. And now I know what I need to work on. So I thought that was interesting because we haven't really talked so much about that, Josh, like how to handle that specifically, those really difficult defeats for younger players, and how they can continue to persevere through that toward the mastery of the sport. And you read through his bio in the intro, and I would guess that not a large percentage of our audience may know exactly who Brian Teacher is, or have seen him play, or knew that he won, a major title in Australia. By the way, you can see that match on YouTube, that final, where he plays Kim Warwick, an Aussie. And you can see that, yeah, he's a really smooth player, and so forth. It's a grass court match back then. Australian Open was still on grass. But you see how he kept up that progression of simply working on his game, and it's very interesting to watch how he handles himself mentally in that match, Josh. Very calm between points. There's very little reaction. Even when he won, there was really almost no reaction whatsoever to the win of the title. And for the time period, he actually took a decent amount of time between points. And one thing that he did that I really liked was he had a very long pause after he stopped bouncing the ball on his serve. And he really kind of sat there. And you could see him probably just getting himself calm, maybe visualizing what he wanted to do. At that time, grass wasn't quite what it is today. Bounce was lower and so forth. So everybody's serving and volleying at that point. And so, it was just good to see him gathering his thoughts that way. So it'd be interesting, if people want to spend just a few minutes watching some of that match, just to see what kind of player he was. But so that was one thing, Josh, I thought was pretty interesting, was that dealing with that emotional journey and how he went through it. I guess the part I'll kind of send back to you is, there are a lot of apps out there that are concentrated on the tennis space. Some are like full court tennis, where they're doing more coaching and connecting you with coaches. There are others that are like Swing Vision, which is more, information about a match and your stats and so forth. And then we also had Brian Park on the podcast to talk about APEAK and mental training. And, there are others. We obviously had Max Newland on from FocusCom. That's not tennis specific, obviously, but it's certainly a companion app to the mental game. And there's in some ways there's just a ton of stuff out there. And I think everyone, we certainly encourage people to try out full court tennis, at least for those of you who have iOS devices. I do think that's something that full court tennis will have to resolve at some point. I don't have an iOS device, so it's harder for me. Maybe you can give more background, Josh, on your. I think you've had some limited use of the app, right? Um, so I think it's important that people try these things out, but also figure out what is their overall strategy with using technology on their journey to mastering the game, the learning journey here, because it can become overwhelming if you've got all this stuff and all this information to really sift through it and know what's important for you. The apps do a good job of presenting you with a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean you have to pay attention to everything. So, I think in terms of full court tennis, I'd love to hear a little bit about just, the little bits that you've sampled in there, your thoughts on it as a coach and maybe your insights into it as a player. And I guess your thoughts on just the technology landscape of apps in tennis.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up that piece of it. There definitely is a lot out there in terms of different options. You mentioned a few different apps that we've had, featured on this podcast, right? So there definitely are some options. I think one thing that differentiates it a little bit is that not only is it that ability to really analyze your strokes, but it also helps you connect to all different types of coaches, including, top ATP, top WTA coaches, mental coaches or sports psychology professionals, which is where I've fit in. I just joined the app a couple months ago and my use has been pretty limited, but I have, enjoyed starting to learn how it all works. You can, it gives coaches the ability to put videos of themselves on there, which is definitely something I plan to do. So I think it does, hold a unique place in this landscape. But yeah, I think you bring up a good point that it's important for tennis players to not be overwhelmed by all the different options out there. There are, there is a lot of technology out there, a lot of different options for different pieces of the game, whether it's the mental side of the game, the technical side, the match analysis piece. And I think we have sampled, a good bit of that on the show and through some of these interviews that we've done. But yeah, I think it's important just as we think about the planning out our development and, talking, let's say at a 3-month period of time or 6 months and starting to plan ahead in that way, starting to think about, okay, what are the tools that I'm going to use to get there? And maybe some of these apps, including full court tennis, have a place in that. And, I think that's a conversation that a player can have maybe with their coach, maybe with their sports psychology professional. If it's a junior player, maybe with their parent as well. I think having the whole team, the whole development team on the same page about how we're utilizing these different resources is really important. But I think, yeah, from my experiences, I've definitely enjoyed it. I think it's, it's still growing, definitely still growing. There's good amount of coaches, good amount of players on there, but I anticipate over the next, 6 months to a year, I think we'll see those numbers grow quite a bit. And yeah, I think it's, it's an exciting time to be a tennis player, because there is a lot of different options out there in terms of the technology and a lot of resources that, as we talked about during this episode, 5-10 years ago, or especially 40 plus years ago when Brian was at his peak, these options weren't out there. So I think players of different ages, especially maybe some of our listeners who have been playing the sport for a little bit longer, can appreciate this era that we're in, where we now have access to all these different tools. And yeah, I think, I imagine our listeners got a lot out of this in terms of this conversation. Brian certainly has a wonderful background in terms of his playing and coaching. And I think this app, is a great resource that players can at least check out and see if it's a good fit for them. And yeah, hope that you all enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, and he's clearly passionate about it. We've both had separate conversations with him, and you can see just the amount of focus and attention that he's bringing to promoting this. And so I think that's good to see, because this is not necessarily someone who doesn't know tennis and they're creating a product. This is a guy who knows tennis, he knows coaching. Um, he's been able to enlist a lot of top professionals to help him out, but also even in his advisory board, if you look at the website, he's got people like John McEnroe advising and so forth. So yeah, this to me is a real almost like passion project for Brian, and so that to me is just exciting to see, regardless, and how he's doing with that. So yeah, it was a good conversation, and hopefully we'll keep hearing from him, and it's I look forward to hearing more of your journey on there, Josh, and see how that goes. Right. So that's our show for today. Once again, many thanks to our guest, Brian Teacher, and thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiq/membership. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.